Welcome everyone. If you're just joining us, feel free to drop us something in the chat to say where you're from. We're really excited to kick off this webinar. This is also going to be recorded, and if you're viewing this at a later date at the NASCA YouTube channel, we have several of our other top 10s that you can go back and watch. If you don't know, NASCA has been hosting these monthly webinars diving into topics around our top 10. Our top 10 are priorities of our members, state chief administrators, and highlight topics from employee engagement to digital services to diversity, equity, and inclusion in procurement. Each month, we're hosting a live version of a webinar diving into a topic with some prestigious panelists, as well as hosting a podcast. So we've had some great podcasts around employee engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion in procurement, and supply chains and stockpiles. So feel free to also go and listen to our podcast around these top 10 topics. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone. We still have some people coming in. Feel free to write in the chat where you're coming from. We're really excited to get kicked off here in just 1 minute. So today we're welcoming everyone to Transforming Digital Services and Internal Operations. This is NASCA's Top 10 Live webinar. Thank you. I see people writing in the chat where you're from. So excited to see you, excited to get started here. So before we get started, I want to recognize our esteemed panelist. So today, actually being moderated by this panel is going to be Christy Branscombe, the Commissioner of General Services for the state of Tennessee. Christy is also our NASCA Vice President, and she will be moderating this session. She helps lead our strategic partner initiatives, which is our work with other state associations, with the federal government, and other stakeholders. We also are going to have Angela Nordstrom from NIC, one of our NASCA corporate partners, who's really going to talk about some of the big picture things happening here around digital government. We also have Dan Chennick from the IBM Center of Business. We're really excited to have him here to see the trends that they're seeing in their research, as well as interactions with the federal government. We also have Kurt Otterego. I already botched your name, but I know we've got Kurt, and I'm so excited to have him here to talk about what's happening in the state of Hawaii around some of their digital transformations and also around change management. So I'm excited to hear from him. Then we have Ed Jimenez from the state of Arizona. He's the procurement officer, and we're excited to hear about what they're doing with AZ Ramp and State Ramp. And then finally, Sean Carell with iValua. We're excited to dive into some of the barriers around digital transformation. So we see our panelists in front of us. What we're going to do is we're going to launch a poll just to gauge where people are at in this process. So Kayla, let's launch our first poll. So just in your experience, which function is being more prioritized to be automated or digitized? Is it more of those front-end services, citizen-facing, that allow citizens to file applications or enter relevant information? Or is it more internal processes, things like finance, administration, maintenance, processing? Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on internal operations, but we just find it interesting. Which areas are being prioritized in your organization or agency? We've got some coming in. I'm going to give it another 10 seconds. So which ones are being prioritized, either by funding or by leadership? More citizen-facing automation or more internal operations automation? There you go, Kayla. And will you show everyone the poll? So kind of interesting, and that may show who we have on the call and who we target, but a lot on internal operations. So in the past, when we've done some of this research, we found that a lot of the citizen-facing portals were some of the first ones being automated because of constituent services. All right, we've got one more poll. So since we're focusing on internal operations, and that was what NASCA members focus on, are there any of these specific areas that you feel really offer the most valuable and useful solutions that you're currently using? Any digital solutions? Is it your procurement? Purchasing really has some great digital tools. Maybe facilities, maintenance requests, desk sharing requests. Accounting, so great digital service around collections or disbursements. HR with hiring, performance reviews. Or workflow management. We know several people implemented Teams or Basecamp or Slack, some type of collaboration tool that's really been rocking it. So we'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer that. Any of these tools that you feel has been the most valuable and useful solutions over the past couple of years. And some of this may depend on the seat that you're sitting in. All right, Kayla. So maybe not surprisingly, because we've all adapted to these, a lot of workflow management and collaboration tools have been the most useful. And then we have procurement and some HR. All right. Well, hopefully all of our panelists were watching that poll, because I'm going to hand it over to Christy to get some of our reflections from our panelist, before we dive into each topic.
Jamie. So we're going to be talking about investment in digital strategy and why it is so important right now. So I'm just going to speak from the state of Tennessee, from our perspective first. We really, of course, all went to this work from home environment like so many people did really quickly because we were all set up on laptops and ready to move home. But the one thing I think that we focused on is delivering services to constituents. And so we had a MyTN app that was fully functional right before COVID hit. We were starting to gain some traction with it. And now we have up to 46 different services that can be gained by our constituents accessing the app. Everything from burn permits to driver's services to reporting abuse, search licenses, finding childcare, healthcare, dental care, even all kinds of different crisis lines. So for us here at the state, that's really what we're seeing is we're getting a lot of traction, a lot of good vibes, and a lot of good feedback from all of our constituents regarding our MyTN app. So just want to start asking, I guess, with the survey to focus on that and ask all the panelists if any of those reactions to the survey poll, or was any of that surprising to you? And so if any of the panelists have comments about the survey poll, I'm sure we'd all love to hear what your reactions are.
Hi, Christy. This is Sean. I guess I'll start. I'd say that first one. I wouldn't say necessarily surprising. I'd say it's encouraging. It seems like we've got the front end customer facing part down, and now people are focusing on that back end part, which is like I say, encouraging.
Right. Anybody else want to comment on the survey?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm kind of neutral on both. To Sean's point, we're doing a lot in the front end with our services piece. We have a one-stop service for all of our Department of Transportation for people who need their driver's license, things like that hooked up. It's a great tool and suite. We're also upgrading a lot of our HR procurement systems. A couple of years ago, we upgraded to a new procurement system with Sean's help there. And so customers really enjoy that. So I think both are very important to keep those things modernized.
Right. Dan?
Yeah, one note to add. It was interesting that the workflow had such a high response and HR and financials were kind of low. I think one was 0 and one was 10. And so it looks like for the sort of throughput activity, it's being used, but not for like the mission support activities as much.
Right. Angela or Sean, or I guess Sean spoke earlier. Ed, anybody else have anything else they want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the part that's interesting, right, is that I think that that's a good point that Sean made, that we've had this focus for the last 20 years on those citizen services and how to really connect those. And it's almost like now we're connecting the back pieces with it as well. And so it's that full circle delivery, which I think is only going to continue to propel and improve, the front end services as well. So it's an exciting transformation.
Right. Dan, did you have anything else to add? I'm sorry, I said Dan, I meant there is I'm sorry, Kurt. I'm sorry, Kurt. I'm looking for the names here and can't keep it all straight.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Angela said. I think all of us across the country as well as the globe got used to in person over decades, and all of a sudden with a flip of the switch, we had to go virtual. and that was a good thing. But with that virtual aspect and not in person, what we've learned and what we saw and what we're experiencing is that both the front end as well as the back end systems could not provide that kind of capacity to support that. And so I think states are focusing on the backside now, as well as Hawaii, and I'll go over that in a sec.
Great, great. All right, well, thanks for your all's feedback on the poll. That's good to hear. So Angela, why don't we start with you? I know this past year has pushed government to quickly innovate their processes and elevated the priority to continue to improve the user experience through use of digital tools. We've been talking about that somewhat. But based on your experience, can you share some of the emerging trends that you're seeing, especially for the internal processes, which we've talked a lot about here just now?
Yeah, thank you, Christy. And I have to say thank you for your time and for the NASCA membership, but also just as a point of personal privilege, since we're both sitting in Nashville, I just want to say thank you to you and all the public officials that have kept us safe for this last 18 months. NIC has partnerships across 30 different states, and we, just like all of you, had to flip the switch and take all of our folks home, but still continue to provide service. And to me, that kind of lays the groundwork for what we're seeing across what the future will hold. There's been this drastic shift really in 3 different areas. One is information. 2 is the pivoting of the use of technology and those tools that maybe were already in place. And then 3 is just that rapid deployment and increased use mindset. As one example, the state of Pennsylvania, it's one of my favorites. So we all have governor websites, that put up information. Governors always want people to go to them and get this information that they need. Well, overnight, the governor's site went from maybe getting 10,000 folks visiting it a day to 1 million people trying to get onto his live announcements around COVID. And every state saw that. And so the results from that is twofold. One is you've now created a new channel of expectation for citizens on where they can get information, but also how they're going to get that information. And that impacts the internal delivery of that information. How do you make sure that the information that internal folks within government are providing out is the accurate information? How do you make sure that your systems are ready for those kind of loads? And how do you continue to build that trust that this is a trusted resource for the information that they automatically need? So that's been an interesting transition to look at. Secondarily to that is we saw that with the states that we're privileged to partner with, that they put up over 130 new services within the first 60 days of the pandemic. So these were solutions that they didn't even know that they needed, or where they took technology that was already in place and really tried to make it into what was needed. A great example of that are the scheduling tools. If you think about the scheduling tools that most DMVs have in their offices, right? It was first focused on that individual having the ability to come through the front door, get the appointment that they wanted, created the efficiency for the internal teams as well. Well, all of a sudden, this became a tool that not only was being used for DMVs, but also for unemployment, and then even for scheduling of vaccinations or appointments for getting tests. And as part of that, then you start to think about, how do you upload documentation that's necessary? How do you validate that this person is who they say that they are? How do you make sure that the security is there throughout the whole process? And the new tools and the new technology that you can basically take solutions that are already in place and build out those efficiencies. Again, with that focus on internally, but also externally to get that perfect marriage between the two. And then the last one that I just I think that we all are seeing is just this new standard. It's all about rapid deployment. I think about, I've worked in or with state government for nearly 25 years. I hate to share that amount of time, but you think about the expectation of service and delivery, and with each of these steps, there's a new norm that has been set. And what we're seeing, and what we continue to believe will be true, and would love to hear what the states are thinking as well, but is that this is going to be the way that we deliver now. And so there is no longer that 18 months to deploy a service or a solution. We need to think about it in incremental bites. How can we get immediate service to those that need it? And the numbers prove it out. In Utah, they saw their use of digital services grow by over 25% just in the first 6 months of 2020. In Pennsylvania, as an example for hunt and fish, which we know outdoors, right, had so much focus on it because everybody wanted to do something, but they had a 43% increase in the first 3 months of this year of 2021 compared to 2020. And financially, that meant an extra $5.6 million for the state. So there's that external benefit of making sure that these services are really well adapted to the needs, but then the state has the internal efficiencies, but also the financial rewards that can come from it as well.
Yeah. Who knew government could be so nimble? But I guess
Yeah.
when the dollars are speaking, we do listen. So those are all really good points. I wanted to ask you and Dan both of this. We talked about what we're doing out there. What are some emerging technologies, though, that you guys see coming down the road that state and local governments should be exploring that they're not necessarily exploring yet? And one of those I know we're very interested in, and you kind of talked about it, scheduling, because in Tennessee, we're really moving to, you're not going to be working in the office every day, which you living in Nashville, Angela, driving into downtown is a painful experience at times. So some of the people who don't have to do that anymore 5 days a week. And so we are downsizing our office space throughout state government. In fact, we're going to be taking about 1 million square feet out of the state portfolio. So that desk sharing, scheduling, those kind of things are going to be really important for us. And I know all the states are kind of looking at each other going, who's trying what and who's got the best app and who's really going to take control of this need. So would love to hear from you and Dan about what other emerging technologies we should all be looking for.
Angela, you want to start?
Sure. Well, so I think there's some great tools that have been deployed. Definitely the chatbots. I think that has become kind of that standard piece. I still think that Missy down in Mississippi is my favorite, maybe just because of the title that it was given. But I think, when we look at these new technologies, like you said, it's about leading with security and the customer focus. The one that I would add into the mix that I think starts to get to the delivery of these different components out is the single sign-on aspect. That seems to be almost that holy grail of how we're going to get that next level of efficiency. How do we know that the person that's presenting themselves is actually Angela Nordstrom or Christy Branscombe? And then what do they have access to? And, think about how great it would be when we get to that point where it's not only at the state level, but also local and federal. And we really start to connect those components. And so whether that's a technology or more of a solution and a process, I really think that leaning into that even speaks to what you said, Christy, making efficient use of technology like scheduling tools as well. And I don't know if you've seen the same.
Yeah, I'm seeing very similar patterns. Thanks, Angela, for those insights. Thanks, Christy, for the question. And of course, thanks to Jamie and to NASCA for bringing us together. The IBM Center works with NASCA periodically. We're a research organization, and we primarily work with academic experts who do reports and studies, and we engage with government leaders at various different levels around technology management, innovation issues that are affecting governments in the US at all levels and also around the world. So we've done 400 reports, and we've got hundreds of interviews with government leaders that can serve as a corpus for other leaders to learn from. So happy to follow up on those. A good part of our research does involve sort of the application of technology to government and at the front end and the back end. And I would echo what Angela said and add a couple of notes at the state level perspective. One is around the use of sort of the suite of technologies that artificial intelligence enables. And this can include robotics process automation and even sort of sensors that are driven by AI through the Internet of Things to provide services. A couple of examples, one at the service delivery level, which kind of has reformed how people at a county level have done their back end work to provide front end services, is the Access 360 program in Sonoma County, California, which is also being replicated in San Diego, which basically uses a set of AI and analytics tools to allow caseworkers and individuals, if they have the capability, to access and gain entry to programs very quickly, much more rapidly, to the rapid iteration point that Angela made in terms of rapid use of services. So the AI sort of allows the caseworker to pinpoint very quickly across a suite of programs that would have taken weeks to kind of go through all the decision rules to figure out what the person was eligible for and then help them apply. And through this platform enables that to happen sort of in a matter of minutes, so that the person can really focus on what's unique to their situation, the caseworker working with the individual, rather than having to do a lot of back-end work, fussing with the system to try to figure out how to get access to the right decision rules in the service. So that's one example. A second one from at the state level is sort of the Internet of Things, as I mentioned. We had a report out of our center done very recently by a researcher at American University in Washington, D.C. And this researcher looked at a number of applications at the local government level around the Internet of Things and how governments are using it to improve services. There's a highway there's a section of I-85 in Georgia, which is now called the Ray Project. It's actually a solar highway. So they have IoT sensors kind of reading cars, if you will, and they are looking at sort of how does that reading enable traffic flow to occur more effectively and efficiently. They have solar panels that they're installing so that electric cars can have solar recharging and that sort of thing. And they're really looking to the future to again, sort of redesign how they build at the back end, the transportation systems and services, and enable that to be delivered through these IoT-based sensors on the highway to understand, like when there's a traffic tie-up that they have to deploy some road assistance to, or just simply to provide, in the future, they're looking at wireless charging through the solar panels enablement. So really interesting applications of some new technologies at the point of service level.
That's fascinating. I've been wondering when we're going to put the solar panels in the roadway. We've heard about this technology for so long, so I just hadn't heard much about the application of it. So that's great to learn. All right, so let's talk to Kurt, maybe do a little deeper dive. Kurt's in Hawaii, which I very much envy today because we're having a nasty day in Nashville. So Kurt, you get the weather award today for sure. Why don't you tell us a little more about what's happening in Hawaii regarding your upcoming planned digital services, and if you have any recent projects you'd like to share with us. I'm sure the audience would like to hear about that.
Sure, great, Christy. Thank you. Aloha and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. We really appreciate NASCA and Jamie and her team for putting this together. Yeah, a lot has been said. As you all know, Hawaii is a favorite spot, both domestically, California, the mainland, as well as internationally. And obviously what we saw last year in March was a sudden stop in tourism. I mean, dead stop, and nothing like that has ever happened. And so what we saw is tax collections just plummet. And really, the state of Hawaii has known that we've been too dependent on tourism. And so they've been doing things over the years to diverse about that, but it's a long-term thing. So really, the governor told us all that we need to just focus in three categories, right? The first obviously was protect, and that was a public health issue. As we got through that, we got to revive the economy. And then we got to strengthen our community. And so where we're at is obviously we're continuing to do the revival, but we're now focused on strengthening, and that's where the technical projects come in. So I did send a slide presentation that you can pop up on the screen at any time, just to show you some of the projects that we're working on. One in particular is a financial modernization. And if you go to that next slide, you can see that, as we went through the process and prioritization, the immediate one was not even on this. It was called unemployment insurance. And the backside was also a 40-year mainframe program that just collapsed. We didn't have the capacity. And so what we learned is that our mainframe systems need to be replaced. More important than processing unemployment claims was moving the money. And that's where general accounting and general services came into play, and we pitched a financial management system. As you can see from the chart, just simply, we have 18 departments. We have over 50 different agencies and attached agencies. And so there are many different silos in the state of Hawaii, and they all have their own respective systems. But what we lacked was a uniform chart of accounts. And so as the CARES Act funds came in, it was very difficult to automatically process things. We had to standardize it manually. And so as you can see, just from this chart, as is all governments, there are a lot of different components that you need to integrate. And what we got, I would say not flat-footed, but what we painfully went through last year and continue to, is the lack of integration and data, real-time data. So the next slide really focused on our ability, if you go to the next slide, our approach to things. And I think Jamie touched on that first. We all know that in any business proposition for technology is actually the third leg. It's the last leg. You really got to focus on people and process before you get to technology. And I think all of us experience government pivoting relatively quickly. It was a paradigm shift, frankly, where in Hawaii, we call it the no can because cannot. And if you ask cannot, because no can. Simply what that means is people were not willing to change or move. We could not process things automatically because they needed a piece of paper. They needed this ticket instead of automatically interfacing it to the systems. And so what we found is the need to focus on the business side and really try to identify the priorities that we thought would make a difference, whether it's across the board, not just accounting, but whether it was in distance learning, whether it was in the capacity to move data, not to say the least, the data repository and a data mart. And so we identified broadband limitations that we have to expand across the state. That became very apparent for us when distance learning came into play. And unfortunately, some of the kids that could not get to school did not have even access to the broadband, to Wi-Fi. And so we found all those priorities. And so we're identifying all that, and then we're right at the stage of identifying the different vendors that can provide a solution. Going back to the accounting system first is what we prioritized. The next slide would show really the priorities in which we're going to do it, and Jamie touched on it. Change management. I can't overemphasize that need before anything else is really the people, and not only socializing them with different opportunities to change, but the willingness to change and our ability to tell them why they should change. The state's financial system is over 45 years old, and the processes have been built upon people controls. And because the systems back then only processed, they didn't have logic to determine whether it's complying with the law limits and what have you. So people in the state have positions governed by the unions. Those positions have specific functions, and it won't go through to the next step unless that individual or group of individuals say yes or no. And so obviously in today's world, that would all be automated through settings. And so change management is something that we're heavily focused on and going out to the 18 different departments. But then after that, we need a unified structure. And that's where the uniform chart of accounts from an accounting standpoint where we can count apples to apples so that everybody says a pencil is a pencil kind of thing. And so through that, we're going through all these different things, and we're happy to share these slides with you later after the presentation. The next slide really shows more from the organizational readiness. Are we ready to make this change? And again, it goes back to people and the commitment of our individuals but in order to give a commitment, we have to give confidence. And so we're building a team, we're dedicating a team of individuals to go through that accounting side and re-engineering and doing that workflow analysis. We've just started. And so that's a long road ahead to identify which priorities we want to do. It takes an act of Congress literally to get an appropriation that's approved by the legislature into the accounting system. And then for the request for funds, we call it you have to encumber the funds, and then we have to ask for it in an allotment from Budget and Finance when they do their analysis. And then it has to go to the governor for his approval. And so you can tell that if from a manual point of view, if it sits on someone's desk, it's very inefficient. So through that process is going to be workflow automation, not just installing an accounting system. The next slide really focuses on what we're working with our consultants, Spire Hawaii, on in terms of change management. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see the different boxes and the questions that we're asking of the organization. And it goes back to, what's in it for me, right? You gotta focus the concerns of all stakeholders and the commitment that we can get, and as well as the realistic aspect of that plan, so that it's doable. And that's a heavy lift. That's a tall order to fill for employees that have already been overtaxed during the pandemic. Our budgets have been cut, therefore positions haven't been filled. And so there's a lot of uneasiness in the state. Yet I'm very proud of our employees in the state for their dedication to continue to go. And it's nothing short of miraculous how the state has cobbled together and worked together as a team to be successful. And so that in a nutshell is really what we're focusing on there in a chart of accounts, and implementing a new financial system, which is going to be a heavy lift for the state, because it integrates the silos that don't necessarily connect together today. But in order to connect them, we need to get broadband, we need to expand our infrastructure to do that. But yeah, that's one of the projects.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Let me ask a follow-up people question here. So you're talking about change management. I would imagine people is the hardest part of all of that. How did you lead through all of this? Because it is a lot of process that you talked about. It was very involved. How did you lead the group through that process to get everyone there? And it was a pretty drawn out process the way you described. I'm wondering how long it really took to make it happen.
It actually preceded me. The Uniform Chart of Accounts actually started over 6 years ago, even before I arrived at the state. And so that took heavy lifting, going out to each department and talking through what their accounting challenges are, what their needs would be, what their preferences, and really what data they're looking for. The state does not have real-time data that you can just call up on the screen and say, what's my appropriation balance, remaining balance kind of thing. You have to search through it. And so each department has similarities. And obviously each line of business, as I call it, the programs have different missions. And so cultivating all of that, but it really takes just individually talking to them. It's as simple as that, but we have to go to them. It's not the other way around where you call a meeting and they show up. So it's a little bit of hand holding, a little bit of charisma. And so going forward, what we are doing, and it's not done yet by no stretch of the means. This is an ongoing process that will continue even as we start to implement the system. Because as we learned in our payroll system, which we automated statewide, people don't like change. And it's a matter of listening to their issues, and they'll come up with every single excuse why they shouldn't change. Even in time and leave, we're starting to automate that. We're in our third group now. Just simple things like In one department, 4 people had to review your vacation request before it got approved. As opposed to when the system is built, it goes to the immediate supervisor. So there's a lot of those kinds of things, and it's just a personal preference, right? Control. And so, but that's change management, and that's giving them a reason to give confidence to the system that, no, you don't need to look at that. You can see it after the fact. But for efficiency's sake, we're going to shoot an employee can put it in, they put in a request, and one person will approve it.
It's amazing. We can get a lot of people approving just about anything in government for sure. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate all that information, Kurt. So let's do a little bit deeper dive with Arizona. And Ed, I know you're sitting around waiting to hear from us. So what we want to really talk about is, again, new digital services and automation and what's changed and what new technology you may be using actually in procurement in Arizona.
Hi, Jamie. Sorry. Speaking of technology challenges, working from home and not getting cut off on these virtual meetings is one of those challenges we're facing. So good segue into this one. So I think I missed part of your opening question because I was cut off.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just asking, what are you seeing in Arizona? What new digital technologies and what are you working on specifically regarding procurement? That was one of the survey results, is there's a lot going on and to digitize what we're doing in our processes in procurement. We've certainly seen that in our state as well. So what are you seeing in Arizona? What are you guys working on in that way?
No, I appreciate that. And thanks to NASCA for having Arizona part of the team today. And hello to everybody out there. Good morning, afternoon, whichever time zone everybody's in. Arizona never changes its time zone, so it's always the same time for us. Hey, well, let me start by saying, I mentioned earlier that we had already started doing like a one-stop opportunity. So service to all Arizonans have a one-stop shopping approach, if you would. And we started with our Department of Transportation, did those things. We're now expanding that to other agencies out there. The legislation just approved funds to go start down that road. So we're excited to go off and do that. From a procurement standpoint, as I mentioned, in 2018, we upgraded our whole procurement system, and we now have an iValue suite with Sean and his team's help, and just excellent customer feedback from that. It's a game.
Am I the only one? Okay, you guys are missing Ed too? Okay. Ed, we're not hearing you very well. You want to see what you can do?
So maybe if we repeat that last part, Ed.
Yeah. Well, he was just making the point that this is one of the problems. So, Ed, you want to try to go out and come back in and see if that works?
We'll do that. And while we're waiting on him, maybe we ask Dan if he's seeing anything different in the federal government. I know he does a lot of work in the federal space, and then we'll jump back to our state member.
Sure, thanks, Jamie, and happy to kind of draw a comparison. So I think a lot of the technologies that we've talked about at the state level are present sort of in a more immediate fashion, because obviously states and localities are closer to the point of service delivery. But they're also using artificial intelligence and a lot of the infrastructure technologies are moving more toward sort of flexible hybrid cloud frameworks, where agencies are using different cloud platforms, and they're adopting standards to be able to interoperate. We're not there yet, but that's sort of the evolution. We're seeing a lot. I think we heard earlier from Angela around single sign-on, and seeing certainly a lot in terms of secure authentication, especially given the news of the last few weeks around access to systems and needing to lock that down. And we're even seeing some introduction of evolving quantum computing frameworks into encryption mechanisms. Some of you may be familiar with the technology arena around quantum computing and the ability of quantum to deliver a much more secure encryption pattern for digital access. So a lot of different technologies, but we're also seeing at the federal level in some basic workflow examples that I think will resonate with some of our state colleagues. And that one example is these application of artificial intelligence to improving simple workflow in a compliance office. So in our Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the federal agency that kind of looks at trends in employment, and I know many state employment agencies have similar statistical offices, they spent a lot of time trying to count numbers of just generally what was happening in different workplaces, as opposed to being able to spot trends in what was happening, because they were able to input the numbers and sort of get a sense for what was happening across the database much more quickly. And they applied some artificial intelligence algorithms to automate the intake and initial presentation of the numbers. And they saved like 80% of the time that it took to actually get the initial flows in for understanding labor patterns across the country, which I think would be very relevant to states in that arena. And then they were able to have their analysts really drive toward doing some higher order work. So applying these kinds of technologies to improving the service delivery flow at the back end is something that we're seeing certainly at all levels of government. Just a couple of examples.
Thank you, Dan. Ed, do we have you back?
You do. Again,
Okay.
apologies. Yeah, I'll jump in and just go right to the ASRAMP approach here.
Great.
So Arizona, like all the other governments around the world, are struggling with the high increase of cybersecurity attacks. And so what are we doing to kind of, mitigate that risk across the state of Arizona? Well, our governor, Governor Doug Ducey, he signed an executive order in 2018 to establish an Arizona cybersecurity team. And these are with federal people, private entities, higher education, and folks who understand this world. So that group was established in 2018. Their mission was to mitigate across the state cybersecurity risk. And so they've been going at this for a few years now. And the challenges they've had is nobody knew where these risks were coming from. We didn't know if agencies were inviting these risks in. We didn't know if the suppliers were protecting our data, and these are our cloud vendor suppliers out there. There was just no idea. So the team had to get to work and figure out some processes and controls to put in place to help mitigate those things. So Arizona team, they started with the state ramp, process out there. It's a federal program. Suppliers get certified through the state ramp program out there. I understand half the folks on NASCA are technical folks, so they probably know more about this than I do. But so we mirrored the FedRAMP program and created a program called ASRAMP, and it was tailored to more of the state government needs, if you would, out there. And it put in process controls for our cloud suppliers. So there's 3 levels of controls. If you're going to be part of a solicitation, if you're a cloud supplier, you need to answer an initial 35 control questions. That helps our IT organization assess the strengths you have in keeping government data and information up in your cloud environment. And then we make that assessment. They give that back to purchasing in a ranking order as to what they think the risks are or not. And then we'll pick how many suppliers we think are susceptible for this RFP or proposal that we're working on. And if they make that next step, it could go up to 125 additional questions have to be answered, then up to 325 questions, depending on the complexity and the type of government data that's being stored in the cloud in there. So that it's been very successful. We have over 235 approved suppliers, cloud suppliers, that have gone through that process. Those approvals are good for 3 years. And then you'll get a 6-month notification prior to the end of the 3rd year for recertifying your company in the ASRAM process, if you would. And it's a positive thing when we're working with underwriters to finance things at the state level. It's a plus up because they see that reduces risk to the state, if you would. So there's a really good benefit there. Quickly, we are transitioning to what is now called the state ramp program. And state ramp is also mirrored from the FedRAMP process, but it adds a 3rd party certification. So there are third-party suppliers out there that'll pick up the ball from our IT team, and they'll help get our cloud suppliers certified. They'll follow a similar process, but it'll be a third party that's going to help get these suppliers certified and make sure the state is protected with their data and information, if you would. We are just starting a pilot on that, and we're glad to come back and share that pilot downstream with everybody. But so far, the success of the ASRAP program really has reduced a lot of strength and brought clarity to the 133 agency boards, commissions that we have, as to where our risk areas lie, and then how can we work on mitigating those, if you would. Same with our cloud-based suppliers, if you would. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, so we'd love to have a lessons learned kind of when you get through this for sure. Sure, there'll be a lot of people curious about that. Let's go ahead and turn to Sean at Ivalua. You guys, I know Sean did a really interesting study regarding barriers to entry, specifically for vendors entering the public sector markets. Many of these solutions of these barriers include changing policy practices, and that can include a digital solution as well. They have identified some barriers for me to share with all of you. You know, complex government requirements can be slow, costly, and of course the processes can be confusing. We all know that, right? Insufficient communications is an issue, bias towards incumbents, of course, and complex regulatory requirements. So, Sean, here's really the question. Just can you walk us through those findings and then some of the recommendations that came out of this study?
Sure. Thanks, Christy. And yeah, it was a great study that we did in conjunction with our friends at Public Spend Forum, GovShop, and at North Carolina State University also had a hand in it, their supply chain center there. And they really dove deep, really in three ways. One was going back and looking at previous studies to barriers to entry, both on the state and the local and the federal level. And they also did interviews and focus groups with public sector professionals, public sector procurement professionals for barriers. And the last thing they did, which I think was the most powerful, was surveying the suppliers, asking them, okay, what do you think the problems are? So they triangulated with that and came up with really the four big barriers that you talked about. And I'll hit on a couple of those. The first is the slow and costly process that you mentioned. You know, if you're looking for innovative companies, typically, small companies don't necessarily have the corner of the market on innovation, but it's where a lot of the innovation comes from. They don't have the runway for these procurement processes that some of the larger firms, larger organizations do. So if your process is slow and costly, they've got to place their bets, and they can't always place them where it's going to, like I say, they just don't have the runway to place their bets everywhere. So when you talk about digital technology, I want to go back to a couple things that my co-panelists said. You know, Dan talked about how AI was speeding up how social workers do their jobs. Not only that, it's making them more effective at doing their jobs. So technology can do that for you. And Dan gave you a couple illustrations. Kurt talked about how technology is important, but that people and processes are at least as important. And you've got to get that part right, because people, as Kurt said, they don't like change. So when you go into digitization of your processes, you've got to have your people in mind when you go do this. But we talk about, if we go back to the slow and costly process and how digitizing this will help, simple things like in the sourcing process, like cloning past events, right? With the click of a button, you've got everything you did last year. You don't have to go through digging through Bob's desk to find out all of the stats and all the requirements that he had in his last procurement sourcing event, solicitation event. You've also got automated scoring, right? Instead of having everybody do it with paper and pencil and scoring and have that done automatically. That speeds up the process, cuts down on the slowness. And the last part is, it's simple, but it's taking the paper out of the process, right? The printing costs, the shipping costs, the time that it takes to get there. It all goes back to speeding up the process. And in some cases, it took the pandemic to make that change really evident. Like now you've got to do it. And you did it, and you saw how things, like I said, it just became a more efficient process from a procurement perspective. The other piece, we talk about bias toward incumbents. And again, one of the biggest things that suppliers hit on, one of the things you can do with technology that's easier, I would argue, than doing it traditionally, is to hide the identity of the respondents. Tough to do in a traditional procurement process. I would argue a lot easier to do in a digital procurement process, where if you're doing that 2-envelope or that 3-envelope process, you can kind of make sure that it's a very level playing field, because people don't know exactly who they're evaluating. They can guess, but again, I think digitization makes that easier.
Great, great. So obviously, when we're talking about acquisition of digital tools and states consider that, I think it was Ed that mentioned cyber risk just a little while ago. Walk us through how you think states should respond in that regard. What do procurement officials specifically need to be thinking about when we're acquiring technology?
Yeah. Going back to what like what Ed talked about, he talked about, I would argue that the commercial sector and the federal sector are probably a bit ahead of the state and local sector when it comes to cybersecurity. And let's face it, they're maybe more enticing targets, but that doesn't mean you're not a target at the state and local level versus procurement. So I would say look at what they're doing. And Ed talked about ASRAMP and he talked about StateRAMP. FedRAMP's been around for years. And now the states are starting to get into that with StateRAMP, and Arizona is at the front of the wave with their ASRAMP and their StateRAMP. It's a little bit tougher because you have 50 organizations giving input to those standards rather than one. But it's probably, I would say, a good move on the part of states to at least try to get standardization like the federal space has. And and Angela talked about bringing state, local, and federal together. I see that FedRAMP, StateRAMP process as one of those ways that we're kind of doing that. We're trying to get standards. I'd also say, back to the commercial sector, especially in the financial sector, they've been doing things like VPN, multi-factor authentication, hardware security modules for extra level of encryption. They've been onto that for years, for decades. The states and locals are just now, we're starting to get a lot more requests about multi-factor authentication. It's all of a sudden important. Why? Well, hey, solar winds, Colonial Pipeline, states see themselves as being vulnerable with all this technology coming into play. And, the last point I would make is you've got to find, security is obviously front of mind for everyone now. But you've got to find a way to balance that with the user experience. And it's a very tough thing to do because you've got two very different schools of thought when it comes to user experience and security. And it's tricky to balance the two.
Dan, did you have something you wanted to add on the federal level or just in this regard?
Especially with regard, obviously, cyber, as Sean was just talking about, is certainly in the last few weeks been brought to the fore in ways that we've never had before. And also there's a presidential executive order that the Biden administration put out that talks about cybersecurity application in different ways through the procurement system. I wanted to pick up on the FedRAMP point. I thought Ed's description of ASRAMP was really interesting because he kind of moved past and took lessons learned from the FedRAMP process, which in its conception is really about enabling vendors to go through one set of compliance requirements across multiple agencies. In its application has often become more of a compliance exercise where different agencies kind of adapt different flavors of it. And so I think it's terrific that Arizona is moving forward and other states are moving forward in ways that kind of go right to the streamlined version of FedRAMP, of the RAMP process. And one of the things that NASCA could think about is one of the challenges at the federal level has been 24 agencies, major agencies, hundreds of smaller agencies, kind of adapting it in different ways at their own level. And there might be a set of standards that states like Arizona can lead with that other states can adopt in helping vendors as they work across states in not kind of having a similar experience, but still reaching the levels of cybersecurity that are envisioned by a RAMP type program.
Again, that's another really good reason to have Ed back after he kind of gets through this. So,
yeah, if I could add to the comments there, he's spot on. We want to get to the right area with our supply base, and the ones who are involved and are going to participate, they enjoy it because it's a little bit different, streamlined than the FedRAMP, as Dan stated. And back to some comments from I value from my friend Sean. We had our security teams doing security penetration tests into the new procurement system to try to see how they could penetrate it, how safe it was, and we continuously improve in those areas as well. So that would be some recommendations to other procurement organizations to really make sure you do those types of testing once you identify a new system. It's really any system, be a financial system, HR system, but with cybersecurity the way it is today, you want to have all those right security controls and get those folks who are hackers try to break into your system and try to eliminate those things. So
Great, thank you. So any of our other panelists have anything else they'd like to share? We're kind of coming up to the end of the hour. Is there anything else that we've talked about today that has caused anyone to think they need to share another point or make another point? Well, Jamie, do you have any questions in the chat or anything else we need to be discussing at this point?
Thank you so much. I don't see a question that came from the audience yet, but I do love your point there before we wrap up. As digital transformation rapidly is set out and the new cybersecurity standards, and we're hearing about this federal to state connection, is there anything that's keeping you up at night? Any big challenge on the horizon? I would love to hear from our state members, Ed or Kurt, or even Christy, around this digital rollout. We heard a lot around change and the people component. We heard a lot about cyber. So either Dan or Angela too, or Sean, what's the big thing to be concerned about or keep your eye on over the next year?
Hi, Jamie, this is Kurt. I'll say what you hit the nail on the head. Cybersecurity and the cost of insurance, the cybersecurity insurance on top of that continues to escalate. The state of Hawaii gets hit maybe 50 million times in a week. That's amazing. And thankfully we have that. And I guess thankfully I have a 45-year-old accounting system that can't be broken in because it's not connected to. But in seriousness, I think all of us as state government need to really focus on cybersecurity and protection of data as we digitize, as we go through this. That's keeping us up as we migrate more and more of our services digitally.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kurt. I see Ed came off.
Hey, I'll jump back on. Yeah, so I can send a link to the team, or I'll send it to you, JB. You can send out to the team on state ramp. And what you'll be able to see is the whole state ramp. They got together in 2000, and it's a really great group of folks. Our state CIO is on the board. We have folks from other states participating as well, and great industry leaders in the private sector, public sector. And so if people are interested, I'll shoot the link over to you. And we're looking for some better improvements, and continuous improvement is what it's about. So.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I think we'll continue to have that conversation, sharing about state ramp as it continues to roll out to our members. And then I see Dan.
One point just to sort of raise the level of the implications of the cyber issue is to the broader issue of trust in government. And as we have gone more to digital services in the last year, people have sort of realized how dependent they are on government services in ways that they probably hadn't before the pandemic. That will likely continue. And as we return to sort of a hybrid world where delivery of services is going to happen across multiple channels, cybersecurity, it'll make cyber challenges more complex. And so the ability to deliver smooth services, to get to that user interface balance that was spoken about earlier, is one of the critical elements to build continued trust that government's going to be delivering services in a way that looks out for citizens' needs.
Thank you. Questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, and I saw those, and I think we're right at time, but some really good points that came through around it's really hard as a startup to pitch to government. any advice on these challenges. And we heard Sean talk about those barriers, especially for tech companies. So we'll make sure to follow up with some resources around that. But we've definitely heard that as a small company, especially as more of these recommendations and points keep getting rolled out, it makes it even harder for a small business to pitch to governments. So with that, Christy, any final thought, and then I'll close us out.
I just want to say thank you to Kurt, Ed, Dan, Angela, Sean. Thank you all so much for participating. And of course, thank you to our corporate partners, any of you who are on here. We really, really appreciate your support. And Jamie will all let us know what the next topic is before long, and really look forward to seeing all of you back again. It's been a great session. I've learned a lot, and that's a good thing. It's good for all of us to be able to get together and learn like this. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you so much, Christy, and thanks for leading this initiative on our strategic partners with state associations as well as stakeholders. So we're really excited to continue this. We'll have our next NASCA Top 10, which that one's going to be hosted by our Operational Excellence Forum, and they're going to dive into employee engagement. And we have these once a month that we have them live. And so if you want to forward this on to any of your colleagues, this is going to be recorded. It'll be up on our NASCA YouTube channel in about 2 weeks. So for the other question, this is recorded and is going to go up online, but also go back and watch some of the other ones as well as catch our podcast. Christy has a great podcast on employee engagement. So we also encourage you guys to share that. So with that, thank you guys so much for being here today. And at NASCA, what we believe is in transforming state government through the power of shared knowledge. So thank you so much.